I would like to call the August 27th, 2018 Special Board of Education meeting to order. It is now 6:02, and we are in the Nashua High North Lecture Hall. Could the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Mosher?
I'm here.
Mrs. Oden?
Here.
Mr. Kaufman?
Here.
Ms. Raymond?
Here.
Ms. Timmons?
Here.
Ms. Hohensee?
Here.
Ms. Van Twyver?
Present.
Mr. Guarino is here. Ms. Porter?
Here.
We have a quorum. Everyone is here. Mr. Mosher, are you by yourself?
Yes, I am.
Okay, thank you, sir. Mr. Mosher is joining us by telephone as he recuperates. Thank you, sir.
Okay, and would Mr. Guarino read the prayer, and could Ms. Raymond lead us in the pledge?
Also, I forgot to mention that Ms. O'Gara is joining us also. Okay. Almighty God, we have the high honor and the serious duty of managing the educational institutions of our beloved city. In our common endeavors, may we find a spirit of unity and understanding which will enable us to face our multiple problems with an objective mind, with justice and charity for all, so that any and all decisions made by us will be for the betterment and greater happiness of all of our fellow citizens. Amen. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. I'm going to ask everybody, and I should have thought it earlier. Thank you, Mr. Guarino. Could we just stand and have a moment of silence for Senator McCain, who passed away a couple of days ago, who has spent a lot of time serving this country. So, thank you. Okay, thank you all. Thank you, Ray. Okay, we're going to go right to the items on the agenda. We don't have a consent agenda whatsoever. So our first item, we're going to have administrative recommendations. The first one is for the interim principal at Pennachuck Middle School. So could Mr. Ticini come up and grab a chair here and turn on the microphone?
Ms. Soden, the interviews are not on the agenda. Do we need to suspend the rules and allow for that to happen? There's no provision on this agenda for interviews. So
Well,
do we
it's
need to?
really not an interview. It's more of a discussion where we can ask him questions and have a discussion. So I don't think we need to suspend the rules.
My understanding is that the board interviews these candidates after the committee meets and makes a recommendation. The committee has not, I don't know, has the committee met to interview these people?
I will ask members of the board what would you like to do? How many think we should suspend the rules?
At least acknowledge we have rules. That's the purpose of having policies that require us for the committees to do the work. Last meeting we were here and I remember members saying, oh, committee work should not occur at the board. Well, that's exactly what we have here is committee work happening at the board level. And I certainly want to get these people acknowledged and hired, but I also want to acknowledge our rules.
So do you want to make a motion on that?
Motion to suspend the rules and allow interviews to occur at the board level without prior notice or processing by the committee.
Second.
Any discussion? Do you want to, I think you spoke to your motion. Anybody want to speak to that? I'll say I don't think it's necessary, but I'll leave that to everybody to make their own determination. Could the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Raymond had a question.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see your hand.
No, thank you. I just wanted to point out that we're having a special meeting for the purposes of discussing personnel recommendations amongst other things. So I think we're all here for the same purpose, one way or the other. So I say we take the
From
vote
whom
and
did
move
this
on.
recommendation come? That's my question. It's supposed to come from the HR committee to the board. It did not. That's my point.
Okay. Thank you.
I would say I thought this recommendation came from the superintendent. Is that correct, Ms. O'Gara?
Every summer, we have special BOE meetings where the board, instead of having an HR, I know we've had a couple that we had the HR and the board in back, but we've done this before where we've had a special BOE meeting so that they could pass through. And we didn't do anything differently than we did in the HR committee meeting.
This is
But these
typical
are-
of summer.
These aren't coming from the
Summer.
HR committee. That's his point.
I'm
but
Well, the
Could-
HR
Could
committee
you
is
please wait to
here.
be recognized? Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. Could you make your point again, please?
My point is, and I think this is Mr. Kaufman's point, is that this didn't come from the HR committee. We usually have an HR committee meeting and then we approve, but we're so far behind in the school preparation here that I think we ought to go ahead and interview these people and get them hired.
Ms. O'Gara, do you want to respond?
The HR committee is here as well.
Right.
And could I just understand, my understanding is people from the HR committee were on the interview team and participated in this, and this is typical of what we do in the summer. We don't have,
No, I was not involved with the interviews. So
well, I think one person from the HR committee has to be on all the interviews, and I would say, Ms. Porter, were you on one?
I was on both.
Okay. And I believe you were on there was another interview that you were on?
Yes, but it was not from director level. It was different.
But you were the representative from the HR committee?
That's correct.
Okay. Ms. O'Hensy?
Thank you. Normally, by our policy, the board as a whole is notified when those interviews are going on. That did not happen. And normally, it's the superintendent who nominates the committee who recommends to the full board. So I think it's just a simple vote to put us back on track because we are obliterating a couple steps in the process.
Okay. Nobody has any more comments? We'll move the motion.
I have comments.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry, Mr. Mosher.
Yes, I do not agree with the motion that's being made. However, in the effort to expedite the hiring of these people, knowing the need to get them in place, I will vote for it. However, it says here administrative recommendations. It doesn't say that this is a formal interview process. And because it is not a formal interview process, I disagree with it. So that's my comments.
Thank you. Could the clerk please call the roll? Restate the motion, please?
The motion is to suspend the rules and to interview the personnel who have been recommended. On the motion, Mr. Mosher?
Excuse me. I don't believe that's correct.
Okay, well, can you please restate it?
Well, to suspend the rules to enable the interviews because there was no committee recommendation.
Okay, without committee recommendation, okay.
Or interview.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. On the motion, Mr. Mosher?
Reluctantly, yes.
Ms. Zoden?
No.
Mr. Kaufman?
Yes.
Ms. Raymond?
Yes.
Ms. Timmons?
No.
Ms. Hohensie?
Yes.
Ms. Van Twyver?
Yes.
Mr. Guarino votes no. Ms. Porter?
Yes.
Okay, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 yeses and 3 noes. The motion carries.
Okay. So we have Mr. Tassini here.
Good evening.
Good evening. If you could just give us a little background about yourself professionally and introduce yourself to some of the people that are watching. Thank you.
Sure, happy to. Began my educational career here in the city at Nashua High School. Taught social studies for 8 years at Nashua High and then Nashua High School South. During that time was involved in a lot of initiatives that involved the transition into 2 high schools as well as moving 9th grade up into the high schools. Started out early on working the sophomore academy. My first year hired here was the first year that they built that initiative, working with smaller learning communities at the sophomore level. Excuse me. And then by the time I left Nashua in 2008, I had been the department chair for social studies. Left Nashua High to enter administration at Bishop Girton High School. Spent 7 years there as an assistant principal and 2 years as the vice president of advancement. And then last year, returned back to Nashua in public ed as assistant principal at Pennachuck.
Thank you, and welcome back.
Yeah, happy to be back.
Okay, I would like to ask people to ask one question, so everybody can at least get one question in. If we have more time, we can have a second question. So, who has a question for Mr. Tassini? Ms. Porter?
Okay, I don't really have a question. I sat in on the interview team, and Mr. Tassini did an outstanding job. And I just want to say welcome. It's the night before the first day of school. And you know, first day of school jitter. You've been there before, but I think even teachers who've been teaching for 30, 40, however many years, get the night before school jitters. So I hope you get a good night's sleep, and I wish you well and your whole staff tomorrow and the kids.
Greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Anybody else have a, Mr. Kaufman?
Thanks. How are you? Good to see you again.
I'm doing well. Good to see you.
Thanks for stepping up to be a little bit more permanent. Well, at least interim, I guess, is the word over there.
Sure.
Since I only have one question,
Okay.
I'm curious. One of the concerns I have now, we had a presentation just last week about grading and assessments, achievement, academics, and things like this. And we have all these Tier 3 students. I personally think we're growing our own Tier 3 students. And here's my question. And the reason is because I think we move kids to the next grade when they may not be completely prepared for what's facing them. I don't know if we don't complete the curriculum or if the kids don't fully understand the material, but we're moving them from some grade to the next grade. And cumulatively over time, that adds up, which I believe is why we have the Tier 3s. So what do you think of the idea, let's say, 5th graders and 8th graders? In other words, when you complete elementary and go into secondary, and when you complete middle, going into the high school, if there was some kind of a limbo land, I don't know what you call it, which we formally acknowledge it's there for the kids that are not ready for the next school. I mean, because this is the grades where they change, right? They're moving buildings, the maturity, and and then the whole social stuff. So I'm just curious, because I've had some teacher conversations, I've had administrator, spoken to a couple of principals about it, and I'm just curious if you think it's viable, if something we should look further into.
complex question.
Complex problem.
You bet it is. Well, I think the first thing to acknowledge is that every individual is unique and learns at his or her own rate. I think that's a natural challenge in education, is that we place kids into a grade level, we give it a time frame, we call it a school year, and we expect a certain amount of growth. I think by and large that happens across the country, across the globe. However, our challenges are when that doesn't occur at a rate that we expect, and whether that's remediated or accelerated. I think it can go both ways. I think it's incumbent upon certainly a district of our size to meet that kind of challenge, because we do have those students in our classrooms. And how do we effectively move them along a growth pattern at a certainly reasonable rate of time? Because I think you also have to take into account social emotional development of a young person. And there are many other factors to consider when retaining a student for a grade level, let's say, if that's perhaps what we're dealing with. There's social implications, emotional implications about how they feel about themselves, self-worth, and things like that. And perhaps it's more beneficial to continue to move them on and work with them maybe on a more individualized basis in terms of remediating certain skills. Depends on case-by-case basis. Is it possible to do? Absolutely. I think there are plenty of places in the country that do it well, some better than others. I think it's a growing issue here in Nashua. We weren't having these kinds of conversations per se a little over 10 years ago when I was teaching in the district. I think we were starting to see a lot of that, starting to recognize some of that, and wondering how to deal with it effectively. Annual test measurements are a difficult way to do that, right? It's hard to force a young person into a year's worth of learning in a year's worth of time. It doesn't always work that way. I think it's important to acknowledge that, by the way. If people don't want to acknowledge that, then you can't solve that problem. If I had the perfect solution, I might be out consulting a lot of other places, and I may not be here right now, but I don't have the perfect solution to that. But I think as a collective group, we need to address that, look at that, and find out what programs work. You have to set a goal, measure the data, and then see what you can do, and then make adjustments along the way.
Thank you very much.
No, thank you.
And welcome.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Ms. Hohensie?
Thank you. And to follow up on that, but not to put you on the spot, about a year or two ago, we had a teacher in the audience from middle school, and she told us that the problem is these kids know even if they get an F, they will be promoted. So I'm challenging you to meet with the other middle school principals to consider what type of a speed bump can you put in the way to say you've got to make it over this bump to get to the next building, to get to the high school. And maybe you don't have the answer right now, but if there are 1 or 2 or 3 criteria that they have to meet, maybe it would challenge the students to meet them, and that it would help. So, and I don't know what the answer is, and I don't know if it's English language arts and whether it's math primarily, but something that you might give thought to over the course of the next year. And if you find that a solution or a suggestion, that we would be very interested.
Well, most certainly, and I think there's an essential question there, and that is the why. You know, why isn't a student making progress in the way he or she might? And in many instances, well, in every case, I think we want our students to be self-motivated, and we know that that's not true of every youngster. And so sometimes, you know, putting the notion out there that, hey, if you don't meet this, you're not moving on, may not be the motivating factor, you know. It could, and it may not. It's certainly, I agree with you that it's something that, as a group of middle-level educators and leaders at middle-level education in the city, we need to talk about and come to some agreement on, and create some intervention strategies. And again, let's measure what works, what doesn't work, and try to replicate that which does.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, thanks.
And welcome.
Thank you.
Mr. Guarino?
Thank you, Madam President. My question has to do with what I call barriers to learning, maybe some impediments that are not necessarily readily obvious in certain students, that are impediments to their, that are holding them back for some reason or another. I just want to get some sense as to how you go about discerning that for individual students.
When you refer to impediments, are you talking family situations, social emotional issues?
It could be.
The whole gamut of things?
Right,
Sure,
these,
okay.
sometimes it's not readily available,
Yeah,
not readily obvious with children. There's something bothering them, but nobody knows it.
Yeah.
But it's an impediment to their growth, their individual
yeah.
growth.
Okay. Yeah, I understand. Thank you. I think the number one thing is I encourage all of the faculty to develop strong rapport with their students. If we don't know their students, if we don't know our students, we can't get to the root of those kinds of issues. If we have blinders on to the fact that they exist, we'll never solve that student's problem, and we're not doing a service to that student. It starts with building a rapport, and particularly at middle school. Middle school is a very interesting time period for those youngsters. Coming in as sixth graders, leaving as eighth graders, two totally different experiences. And I rely on my faculty to be adept at recognizing when there's problems. I think having our advisory program where we have one individual that meets with that student every single day, every single morning, that's a great way to test it. You know, walking up to somebody and just, hey, how's it going today? Your body, you know, gauge the body language, see how things are going. And then the student support services. I know at Pennachuck we have an outstanding guidance counselor group and special education group that know their students so well. They get to know families very, very well. They build those connections. And oftentimes we're preempting a crisis. You know, a family will contact us ahead of time. You know, Johnny may be struggling with this, Susie's struggling with that, and we'll put action, you know, into play before it spills over into the classroom and the student's adversely affected.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I have a question, and I'm sure you've been asked this before in the interviews, but when you go into a classroom as an observer, when you're evaluating or doing an observation, what do you look for?
I look for the students first. I want to see what are they doing to be engaged in their own education. I hope to see students being active, moving around, conversing with one another, solving problems, creating solutions, you know, with some teacher direction and guideline. I think we know our 21st century job skills are changing. The workforce is changing for our students. It's more about transferable skills at that level than it necessarily is in content. You know, when you have 30-year-olds who have changed jobs 5 times and moved into 3 or 4 different industries, you know, it's about those transferable skills that makes them highly sought after and successful people in the business community. I would look for the same sorts of things in our students. Though one individual may not be the strongest math student, but they can work within the context of a team to solve a complex math problem. That's essential, and that's a key component, certainly at the middle level, of what you should be seeing more often than not in a classroom. Obviously, there are times and instances where more teacher-student instruction versus student-led instruction is happening, and that's okay and reasonable. It's about the frequency and getting to know over a longer period of time what an individual teacher is having occur in their room.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mr. Ticini, and welcome again back to Nashua in this rather new position for you. So,
thank you very much.
We'll be glad to see you in the classroom, in the school tomorrow.
Great, thank you.
Don't be late.
Looking for a motion?
Congratulations. Thank you very much.
Mr. Kaufman.
Mr. Kaufman?
Thank you. Move to accept the nomination of Jason Ticini as interim principal over at Pennachuck Middle School for the 2018-19 school year at an annual salary of $103,000.
Second.
Okay, do you have that? Oh, okay. Roll call.
On the motion, Mr. Mosher,
Yes.
Mrs. Oden,
Yes.
Mr. Kaufman,
Yes.
Ms. Raymond,
Yes.
Ms. Timmons,
Yes.
Ms. Hohensie,
Yes.
Ms. Van Twyver,
Yes.
Mr. Guarino votes yes. Ms. Porter,
Yes.
motion carries 9-0.
Congratulations. Thank you. Okay, and now we have our second administrative recommendation. It's for assistant principal at Elm Street Middle School. And we have, let me look at my paper here, Mr. Richard Simino. Welcome. Okay, Mr. Simino, I'm going to ask you to start out the same way that Mr. Tassini did. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you very
Okay.
much. And
Thank you.
for having me here.
Press the button.
Oh, I'm sorry. That'll help. Thank you for having me here. I'm been in education for 18 years now. Prior to that, I was in the Air Force, and then I worked at General Electric, and then got into education in 2000. I've been a social studies teacher at Conant High School in Jaffrey, New Hampshire. I started at Conant High School as a social studies teacher. For the past 4 years, I've been the assistant principal at Conant High School. And I saw I wanted to challenge myself, and I saw the opportunity here in Nashua to do that, and I'm happy to be here.
Okay, thank you. So, do we have any questions for Mr. Simino coming? Ms. Sohensi.
Thank you, and welcome. As a history major way back when, what do you see as the important role of middle school in teaching our students history? What do you enjoy, or what do you look forward to imparting to them?
That's a great question. I loved history my whole life, and even when I was going to school for my history degree, it was a much different time. And today, with the technology in their hand, they can find out who won a certain war quicker than I can teach it to them. So for me, social studies is teaching them about connections, teaching them about the past and what it means to them, what it means to their family, what it means to their heritage, what it means to the future, understanding what has happened in the past and the impact it has on us today and on the future. And being able to research that, being able to not just take the information that I give them or that they hear on the news, but giving them the tools to research, to find those answers on their own. And that's the big piece now, and it becomes even more important as we're moving into the technological age with all this information coming at them so quickly. The ability to cipher through that information and find out and research and get the information on their own is so important.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Kaufman?
Thank you. Mr. Simino, so
Yes, sir.
I think you may have heard my question that I asked Mr. Tassini.
I did, sir.
Having to do you want me to repeat? I'd love to get your opinion on that same subject.
Yes, and I'm kind of at a disadvantage here because I agree with a lot what Mr. Tassini said. And I mean, if we have, if you have well-defined learning progressions, and I know we do here, you do here, and it's to understand, you ask if a student gets an F, what does that F mean? To me, what does an F mean? Does it mean that they weren't passing in their homework on time? Did that affect it? I want to know what they're learning. And with well-defined learning progressions, you can see what they're learning. And if they're learning certain pieces, are they ready to move on while they still have to, you still got to, reach out to to touch those other progressions that they haven't mastered yet. But it's really about what they're learning. And quite honestly, kind of what we've done in the past, we've lumped behavior and what I call habits of work, getting homework in on time or getting to class on time, we've lumped that in with what they've learned. And sometimes that holds those kids, those youngsters back. And if we really look at the learning progressions, what they're learning in the classroom, and then moving them along while also needing to address those ones that they're not getting, I think, and it's a difficult job, and it really comes down to, I agree with Mr. Tassini as well, we have to look at, it's almost like an individualized learning for each one of our students. We got to know our students, know what they're coming in, what their challenges are, know what they're learning, know what they need to learn for each and every one of them in order to succeed.
If I may, quick follow-up.
Sure.
Is it doable? Think about this. Please let us know. I don't want to put you on the spot. for an answer. But please think about the tools that we can enable you to get, develop or otherwise, that will help you know that.
I believe it's 100% doable. And one of the things I talked about in the committee when I was being interviewed is that I love the challenge of coming to a bigger school because I believe wholeheartedly in that we can individualize education for each one of our children and help them each succeed. And one of the things Mr. Tassini at Elm Street has also done is that the advisory is crucial, and having an advisory that's got a well-defined curriculum on how to individualize each individual's education and making connections with those students. So having that time for staff to meet in a smaller group, when you have a teacher who has 30 or more students in the class, that's difficult, I understand. It still can be done. And as Mr. Tassini was also saying, when he walks in the classroom, he wants to see groups working together. That gives that teacher time for some individualized attention as well. But the advisory is crucial to have that, to make that individual connection. But I believe absolutely that it can be done. It's a lot of work. It's much different than, quite honestly, the way I was taught 18 years ago. But I truly believe it can be done. And not only that, I truly believe it needs to be done. I think we're at a critical point that we need to do this for our children.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome, sir. Thank you.
Anybody else? Ms. Porter.
Okay, I had the pleasure of being on your interview team too, so I want to give you a warm welcome.
Thank you.
Night before school, you're going to be learning a lot of new names tomorrow.
Yes.
So I hope you're all. I know you're all set. So welcome, and I wish you a lot of luck. And
Thank you
everyone
so
at
much.
Elm Street, have a great first day of school.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
If there's nobody else, I have the same question for you. As an observer and evaluator, when you go into a classroom, what do you look for?
I actually, I enjoy, I said this in the interview committee, I came in and where the observation process was, you sat down with the administrator, you told them what you were going to be teaching, they came in and they watched the whole. Now, what I love is the mini observations, going in for 10 or 15 minutes, unannounced, seeing what's happening. And what I want to see is clear objectives. The students know what they're supposed to be doing, and they're doing it. The teachers may be walking around checking with individual groups or working with individual students who might need some extra help on a learning progression, but the students are working together, and because that's collaboration, is what it's all about, and helping each other. The teacher is there to facilitate the learning. They're the learning facilitators to help them meet that learning. So when I walk in a classroom, if it's at the very beginning, I'm probably going to see a teacher telling them what the objective for the day is, but the rest of the time I want to see them involved, up and moving around, sitting in groups, working in pairs, working together with the teacher moving around and facilitating that learning.
Thank you. Anybody else that hasn't had a question? Okay. Mr. Kaufman.
Motion to approve the nomination for Mr. Richard Simoneau as assistant principal over at Elm Street Middle School for the 2018 school year at an annual salary of $88,000.
Second?
Okay. Roll call.
On the motion, Mr. Mosher,
Yes.
Mrs. Oden,
Yes.
Mr. Kaufman,
Yes.
Ms. Raymond,
Yes.
Ms. Timmons,
Yes.
Ms. Hohensie,
Yes.
Ms. Van Twyver,
Yes.
Mr. Guarino votes yes. Ms. Porter,
Yes.
motion carries 9-0.
Welcome aboard. We're glad to have you. Okay, and now we will move on to the personnel recommendations. We have 40 of them on our list tonight. Is there any need to go into non-public session if anybody has any questions? Looks like you've been busy, Miss O'Gara.
Oh.
Okay. If there are no questions, I would be looking for a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Motion to approve personnel recommendations, August 27th, 2018.
On the motion, Mr. Mosher,
Yes.
Mrs. Oden,
Yes.
Mr. Kaufman,
Yes.
Ms. Raymond,
Yes.
Ms. Timmons,
Yes.
Ms. Hohensie,
Yes.
Ms. Van Twyver,
Yes,
Mr. Guarino votes yes. Ms. Porter,
Yes.
motion carries 9-0.
Okay. And next, we're going to have an update in non-public. But before we do, I want to ask Ms. O'Gara about how many more positions do we have to hire for?
Well, did everybody get the list that I sent them? Okay, so from that list.
Microphone, please.
here, Mike.
Sorry.
When did you send the list?
Last week sometime, I sent a list. And so all those but 4, we're still looking for the 2 school psychologists. I think we have 1. And a long-term sub speech pathologist. And also, this was a recent resignation for a special ed teacher at Nashua High South, so we haven't filled that. So we have 4 from that list that are still open, which is, it was a big list, so that's pretty good. Also, we also have another 3 open. So 2 of them are from resignations that are on this board packet.
Okay.
Right, and 1 is a recent, and also there's a LOA request on the packet, and that's for that too, so that's 3. So that's 7. And we did post, Title I grant came through, so we did post 3 Title I positions. A social worker for Dr. Crisp and an instructional leader to be shared between Dr. Crisp and Mount Pleasant. And those are under the title grant. And we do have a Title I teacher resigning on the personnel recommendations. So, and we did have Ludge Street, the principal, just tonight told us that a teacher who is going to be a long-term sub to continuing sub just backed out. She got a position in her hometown, so that will open up again. We have like 10.
Okay. But that happens. We've had some late resignations, and I certainly understand people that are taking either a continuing sub or a long-term sub. If they get a full-time position, that's to their professional career. So, and I know we've had, to me, I think I've seen more late resignations this year than I have in a long time.
Yes. And also, Elm Street also had a special ed teacher all set to go, and that person backed out on him. And then I have another packet from the next person in line. And so it's been really, we've had people back out. You can see that somebody that you recently approved has a resignation on here. So.
Well, thank you very much, because I know the work involved in that, and I know you've been very busy, so thank you. Mr. Kaufman.
Thank you. On the same line, if I may, Ms. O'Gara, with Mr. Tassini moving up from assistant principal to interim principal, what is the status of the AP position at Pennachuck?
I've posted it anticipated for interim assistant principal at Pennachuck.
Okay, so it's out there. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Okay. I'm looking for a motion to go into non-public session.
I move to go into non-public under what?
91A32A.
91A32A.
Okay.
I'll second it.
Okay.
On the motion to go into non-public, Mr. Mosher,
Yes.
Mrs. Oden,
Yes.
Mr. Kaufman,
Yes, but I have a procedural question, Mrs. Oden. We have other business that's also personnel related that we need to go into non-public for. Are we going to come back into public and then go back out into non-public again? Thank you.
Ms. Raymond?
Yes.
Ms. Timmons?
Yes.
Ms. Hohensie?
Yes.
Ms. Van Twyver?
Yes.
Mr. Guarino votes yes. Ms. Porter?
Yes.
Motion carries 9-0. We are in non-public at 6:45? Is that 40?
43.
That one's right.
43.
6:43.
So, can I have a clarification question?
Yes.
Just point of order. So, we're going to go back into public and then back out under a different RSA?
A different RSA.
Okay. Thank you.